Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today we are beginning a new journey with a dear friend of mine, Mr. Kevin Gamble. He will be joining me in a long-running series, I hope, of conversations that he and I will have about things that are pertinent to this channel, things that are pertinent to your musical journey and our musical journey as we continue forward as creatives. So I'd like to welcome, with no further ado, Mr. Kevin Gamble.
Hello, Tris. Thanks for having me on here. Love the space you've created and happy to be part of it.
Cool. Well, I wanted to just kind of like start off by asking, is there anything new or exciting you would like to tell people, or would you like to talk any about like, how we know each other? Because we've known each other a very long time.
Yes, we go way back and have many musical experiences to relate to, and coming from the all the way through the late '80s through the '90s, and what we've seen so far this century, we've seen a lot. We've gotten a sampling of a lot of different phases in the world of music and instruments and so forth. So many things to potentially talk about. So we'll have to just pick a few highlights today.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, Kevin and I started back in high school and we were both pretty green. I was a little less green than he was, but we've learned a lot together over the years, and we've always been in some sort of contact or if not direct collaboration, tertiary collaboration, I would say, throughout the whole place. And that's really rare in music to have somebody that you've had around for like, 35 plus years. So it's pretty awesome. Is there anything you'd like to talk about first? Like, what's new or.
Oh gosh. Within the context of fearless DIY, there's a lot of talk about technology, instrument technology, what you can do with it, what the available options are. And I'm working on a song project right now, a recording project, and have been through several stages of it already with recording, and I'm up to electric guitar now. And so I thought I might do a quick show and tell of my main electric that I'll be using on this song and have used on other projects as well. This is, I think it's got to be one of the most obscure Stratocaster models that I'm aware of. It's called the Stratocaster Special, and that's couldn't be a more generic name. They've recycled versions of that over the years, but this was made for only probably a couple years in the mid '90s. It's a
Oh, wow.
Mexican Strat, and it was made from about '94, I think, maybe into '96. They were still making it. Didn't know anything about it when I bought it. It just looked intriguing on the hook, and as I tried it out and researched more about it, I found it's got a few little wrinkles that aren't common in the Strat model. And so, for the most part, it's what you would expect in a Strat. But looking up close, there are a few little differences in it. One that is obvious is it's got the humbucker in the
Yeah.
bridge. The HSS has become, very common over time, and so not such a radical feature there, but one that I find very handy because it's a pretty solid sounding humbucker. One little more obvious difference is it's got, instead of the third knob here, it's got the coil split switch
Oh,
built
cool.
in, which is handy. That's a common mod, we know that, but it produces a really great sound. What it tends to do is just thin out the humbucker sound enough that it's almost like turning down the gain a little bit.
Yeah.
If you've got a good thick gain sound on the humbucker and flip it, it just kind of scoops it out at just enough. It doesn't really switch it into full Strat sound, but it thins it out just enough to clean it up, and it's almost like doing a little EQ on it. So very handy, combines well with the other pickups for that classic Strat sound. And the last little wrinkle in this model, I discovered when I noticed the tone knob had a center detente in it, and I was like, "That's
Oh,
a
yeah.
funny thing for a tone knob to have." And what I didn't know at the time, and learned after that, was that it's a specific type of tone control called a TBX tone control that Fender experimented with for a while, and it's kind of been a and off the beaten path mod that folks have used ever since. But it's really interesting and very handy because it's kind of two tone knobs in one, where the first half of the knob, 0 through 5, is a traditional tone knob. But then from the center point onward, it turns into a different kind of tone knob, where essentially half the knob is a low pass filter, the other half is a high pass filter. So once you go past that center point, it creates the effect of brightening the tone still further, but it's really kind of using that high pass filter to shape the overall sound and cut some lows and give it a different kind of bright quality about it. So just in one full turn of the knob, you've got a lot of different tone options without any requiring any really additional you know power or active anything. So it's kind of become like a little Swiss Army knife of a Strat, where you've got a lot of options crammed into one small space. So apart from that, it's a typical Mexican Strat. It's got a nice neck. It's very lightweight. um, you know
It's a great
could I
all-purpose
make
guitar.
music without all these features? Absolutely. But
Yeah.
it's a nice feature set. So that's a little hidden gem in the Fender Strat line.
Yeah, and it's cool that it's one of those kind of like fairly rare models. Yeah, that tone control you're describing. I mean, it's the basically it was Fender's take on what G&L was doing with the passive treble bass control, except they put it all in one pot. I have one of those pots actually that I scavenged out of somebody's guitar that I rewired, and I've tried it in a couple instruments, and I just didn't find it very satisfying for those instruments. I mean, I was using it in the one of the guilds for a while, and it didn't seem to do much with the humbuckers. And then, but then I recently put the passive treble bass, the PTB circuit, into a Squire Strat that I recently got, and so I may have to revisit that particular pot and try it again in something else, because maybe I just wasn't wrapping my head around it properly, because that was a few years ago. I just had this thing and I started just throwing it in different guitars to see what in the hell it would do. And I was kind of dissatisfied with it. But now that I kind of have more of a grasp, because I became fascinated with that passive treble bass thing, it's such a powerful circuit. And it's passive. You don't have to worry about, like you said, you're not throwing a 9-volt battery in or having
Yeah,
these
and
EMGs
you
or
just made a
something.
great point about it, though, which I don't want to let go by, is that a lot of this is context specific, the context of the instrument and what it's equipped with, and then the context of what you're trying to do, the sound in your head that you're trying to achieve. It's not like this is an objectively great thing that I realize and you don't. It's that obviously not. It's that in the context of this guitar and what I'm trying to do when I turn the knobs on it, it works. But that's different for everybody, and
Yeah.
that's a good point, for everyone to keep in mind, is that whether it's entire instruments themselves or features of them, there's not an objective, one size fits all band-aid. And a lot of what you've covered on the channel kind of gets into those nuances, and their relative value.
Well, you have to experiment too. There is, like you said, there's no like blanket solution. A lot of people think, oh, well, if I buy Lawler pickups, it's going to make every guitar sound better. Well, that's not true. you know, they
And
may
it's
be a
not going
high,
to make the player sound better. Yeah.
yeah, or change your rig or whatever. There's no magic thing. It's all the things at once, and learning how to use them all together. And I think that
Yeah.
that's really tough, because so much of the marketing out there is just like, oh, your solution is here, and it's like, no,
Mhm.
no. I think the cheap pickups sound fine. Let's put some new pots in. So,
Yeah.
which
But
we'll be kind of
speaking
getting
of,
into in a few minutes, I think, with our topic.
yeah, and
Let
but
me get.
before we jump into that, I wanted to ask you about something you covered on one of your shorts,
Oh,
which
sure.
is related to this. Speaking of that DIY tonal magic, one of your shorts covered 50s rewiring a tone pot for what you called 50s wiring. That's not something I'm familiar with. I understood the explanation of how to do it, but talk a little bit more about that and what that can do for your sound, because I thought the way you described it sounded pretty intriguing.
Yeah, sure. So, it's a Gibson thing, or it's primarily known now historically, I think, as a Gibson thing. So Gibson, when they originally were, putting out their first electrics and stuff, rather than having your tone capacitor attached to the input of your volume lug, it was attached to the output. And then you move the capacitor, over to the middle lug instead of the end lug, which I showed in the diagram. And anybody who's interested in what Kevin's talking about, there's just a little short up that says board with your tone pot. And it takes like 50 seconds to watch. And it shows you the schematics if you do screenshots. So anyway, getting back to what it sounds like, it's interesting because your standard or modern wiring, and sometimes they call it 60s wiring. There's like 3 different ways to do a tone pot. There's the 50s way, and then there's the contemporary way that you would see if you opened up your instrument that you bought in the last 35 years or so. And then there's like a mid 60s to mid 70s. There's another way, and that way has kind of been lost to time. Nobody really wires pots that way. So just to draw a distinction between now and then 50s wiring is that when you turn down your tone control in contemporary wiring, it just muffles it, right? It's just it's cutting out the highs, And what happens when you use the 50s wiring with that cap moved over to the output, the tone control almost operates as a subtle volume control / frequency sweep. And what happens is it doesn't cut all those highs out. It's a much subtler experience. It's almost something you have to feel. But what happens is it doesn't get muffled. What it does is it changes character, and it interacts with the volume pot. So all of a sudden, it's almost like having an extra control in a way that's just completely usable. I did it first on the infamous black Epiphone from I Got Scammed on Reverb video, which has become so popular. But anyway, I first did it on that guitar, and I just fell in love with it. And I've done some Strats that way too. I changed the tone capacitor to the output, and at first you're like, it's not doing anything. But then when you take a few minutes, you're like, oh, you start to feel it. And it's almost like using compression. When you first use compression, you're like, this pedal's doing nothing, But then after you play for a while, you start to feel it, and it pushes and pulls you. And that's what I find that 50s wiring does. If you just want something to be muffled, that's fine. Just leave your tone control alone. But if you don't use that setting, if you don't use that mud sound, which is not really all that useful, I think that doing the 50s mod is huge because it suddenly opens up it's like different shades of green. You go from dark green to spring green instead of changing colors altogether. So that's basically it.
That's great. Thank you for explaining that. That's something where I might have heard the term, but didn't really know the implications of it. And I think that's another case of looking beyond the surface and not just, do I flip this switch and my tone is magically this, but interaction with your playing and with the different controls and so forth, and the potential that we may not realize is there.
Yeah, and it operates just the same as any other standard controls. Like most of the time when I'm playing, I'm just maxed out. I got my tone all the way up, and I've got my volume all the way up. And when you're in that setting, it acts as any other potentiometer does. It's just as low load as it can be. So it's not. It doesn't. Making the mod doesn't take away your wide open setting at all. That remains the same. So there's really no loss. And yeah. So that's a hell of a lot about tone controls, which is fun. And we'll probably end up talking about tone controls some more. But the topic I wanted to talk about today is interesting. We're going to talk about budget guitars and whether you can raise them up to the level. And this won't be. We'll start talking about it. This is something that we'll be revisiting. But can you raise them up to the level of like a higher end instrument or even a custom shop instrument? And what's interesting is that Rhett Shull did a video on that this week, and I'm just like, damn you. He always seems to, I come up with ideas or I shoot stuff and then I don't release it for a month or two. And then all of a sudden some other YouTuber has done it. So I'm not chasing Rhett Shull.
Yeah. Well, I think the topic of guitar costs and affordability and where things are going it's on everyone's minds these days. It's
sure.
A hot topic. So, but everyone's got a different angle.
So what Rhett did, and the other unfortunate part is he was modding a white, I'll move out of the way, That guitar, the very guitar that I bought like 3 months ago, that guy is
Yeah.
like modding to make it into a custom shop. The white
Hmm.
Jazz Master back there. It's just a classic vibe. So anyway, they take this classic vibe. I'll be really brief. And they dump about close to $1,000 in parts into
Um,
it, and they roll the
uh-huh.
fingerboard and they do all the things, making it eminently playable, which are legit. Let's talk about the free stuff. The free stuff they did, I agree with. You do a fret level, you roll the fingerboard, you get everything adjusted, to perfection on the nut. But then they just started ripping everything out of it. They put like a mastery type bridge on it and new tremolo, all very high end and just lots of money. And I have to disagree with. And then they rip the pickups out. Everybody says Squire pickups suck. I kind of disagree with that. That's my hot take. I don't mind Squire pickups. Anyway, so they go through all this stuff, and then the total cost of the instruments somewhere around $1,300-$1,400 when they get all done. And I'm like, that's still a lot of money, you know. You can massage the parts, And the thing about some guitars, the machine heads have to be replaced because they're just garbage. But let's talk about the classic vibe. Classic vibes come with good, Kluson style vintage tuners. They're perfectly serviceable, and I haven't found a bridge or a tremolo system on any of them yet. Different eras, different qualities, different makers, for the componentry that I couldn't fix with thread locks, some sandpaper, and lubricant. It's all eminently usable. And so I think that, I guess my point to that whole rant is that you don't have to gut these, quote unquote budget guitars from, Epiphone used to be a budget brand. Let's say you bought one from a few years ago, or a Squire, or any of the other entry level brands, or quote unquote budget brands or whatever. You can usually massage most of the components. And
Mm.
if you want the pickups to sound better, I swear, pots, use better wire, a new jack, and capacitors. Just rewire it, and then the pickups come alive. I did that on that classic vibe Squire I keep referring to back there, that Strat. I rewire, and I've got a video coming out on that soon. I rewired it. The pickup sounded great. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I think, it kind of goes back to the mission of your channel and the title, Fearless DIY. There are stages of DIY with any instrument, any project, that become incrementally more involved or more expensive or more elaborate or more, involve more risk. But there's a whole range starting off that is readily available to anybody. You don't need to buy any additional equipment. You don't need to do any kind of electronics work. You don't really need to do anything. And knowing what those variables are from the very start of, I've got a screwdriver and an Allen wrench. What can I do? On up, most people, I'm guessing most people don't know what's possible to them, and they think this instrument either has it or it doesn't. But just from what you've done on the instruments you've worked with, the transformation and playability with just a little bit of tweaking and adjusting, and then subsequently taking it to levels of working on the frets and so forth, is a radical difference. And I don't think people appreciate what kind of difference is directly available to them. Even just, are you adjusting the truss rod? Are you relatively adjusting the truss rod and the saddles and the height of the pickups and so forth? It can be easy to take a budget instrument and make a small tweak and not see much of a difference and think, forget it. This thing is not going to get me where I want to go. But you've got hanging on the wall behind you, a whole gallery of proof that that isn't the case, that you can, by making some adjustments to an instrument, and if necessary, going further with fret leveling and so forth, you can make an instrument more satisfying, more gratifying, easier to play, and just feel more deluxe than that $3,000 Gibson you pick up off the wall at Guitar Center or whatever, because it's not just the price or where it was made or where the wood was sourced or things like that. Those things ultimately don't determine how little it gets in the way of your expression on the instrument. It's all the things that you can control, all the variables you can tweak that are the pathway to that instrument feeling like, you won the lottery and it does whatever you want.
Well, you hear stories all the time about, there's a lot of players, well-known players, and they're just like, wow, this guitar just feels right. And to make a guitar feel right, it almost is all set up. And as long as the mechanical nature of the instrument is good, as long as the truss rod is adjustable, as long as the bridge is adjustable, as long as if those things can't be fixed, then you can't really fix it. But if something is adjustable, and if you're willing to take a little bit of risk with some sandpaper and other, just basic hand tools just to massage the guitar a little bit, I mean, you can't expect, and Ben from Crimson Guitars, if you're familiar with that, you should check out his channel. They've been around forever. He has a guitar school in the UK, and he actually just said this the other day on camera, and I was like, thank goodness somebody is saying this, and it makes me not feel like an idiot. He's like, no guitar is great until it is set up, and almost all the time and money that you spend on a $5,000 guitar is the handwork that went into the setup. Almost all those hours are not spent on the sanding or the finishing or putting the guitar together. It's the handwork that's done post. And that handwork is what we can all do at home, So that's kind of the point of the whole thing. And I think that it's silly to go and take a guitar that you spend $300 or $400 on and double or triple the price of the instrument throwing parts at it until you've played it until you have it perfectly set up and you play it for a while. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, well, these pickups aren't so bad. And you can take a Jazzmaster trim and just sand the knife edge to get it perfectly flat. That's the only difference between that and a higher end tremolo. They didn't do the handwork. It's just all the handwork. So
yeah. And going through that process, you're literally, saving hundreds of dollars by going through that process first. If you do something and you don't like the result of it, or if you mod something and it didn't do what you wanted, or you messed something up, well, then spend the money at that point, to replace the part or fix something that got messed up. But go give it a chance. Go through that DIY stage to tweak that, and the resources are out there, both to do the basics, the principles of initial setup, and then to help identify the variables that are, okay, I've done this, but it's still doing this. There are layers and layers of resources available, and every time you go through one of those processes, you're developing a usable skill, a repeatable skill. And once you exercise that skill on one instrument, then you've opened up the potential on every instrument you have. And so it's a really good investment. If you change the pickups on one guitar, it doesn't make any of your other guitars sound better. But if you understand setup and how to maximize the potential with what you have, suddenly you have that potential with everything that you touch.
Yeah, and I guess to wrap up, I just, the whole point of this is that I think that everybody should think twice before they're like, they order. I know I've come close to doing this before. You order a cheap guitar or a budget guitar, like you get a Squire or whatever, or an Epiphone, and or whatever other budget brand, and you are already like have your finger on the parts, at your parts the place where you buy pickups. You're on Stu Mac, and you're going, I got to get a new bridge for this. The bridge is going to be garbage. I got to get pickups. I got to do this. I got to do that. Don't gut them. Get them set up. Get them to that perfect, so the neck feels perfect and the frets are perfect and there's no buzzing and you've got everything all set up, and then decide if that bridge is just and one trick too that I wanted to put out there real quick, and I know that I put this out in a short recently. If you've got sharp edges on anything on your bridges and stuff like that, you can file those down, or you can take the grub screws out of Strat style saddles and you can cut off the bottoms and then sand them flat. There's all sorts of things you can do to get that premium feel out of the cheapest hardware. I mean, you can do that. Yeah. So anyway, that's like the point. I think, Kevin, you raised some amazing, one of the reasons why I have to have Kevin on the channel is that his attention to detail is frighteningly good, and he catches everything. And I think that just hearing you speak inspired me, to be like, oh, okay, it just always it's always just great to hear you discussing these things because you're so well considered with it, and I'm hoping that everybody who watches this is realizing, I mean, you should listen to this guy. He's got some good advice. So
Yeah, well, you're demonstrating through your channel that this is, this has a lot of potential and it has a lot of accessibility to people. And so I'm a believer in that message is that empower yourself. It's easy to just want to reach for that mouse and click on, add to cart and feel like that's going to solve everything. But whether it's an artistic limitation, a musical limitation, there's plenty to work on. There's enough to work on that isn't just buying more things and doubling the cost of your instrument to hopefully solve a problem that is probably more in your hands to solve than in the dealers.
Or that may or may not exist. 'Cause
Yes.
sometimes it's a perception thing where it's like, well, that bridge is cheap, so it can't be any good.
That must be what's causing this. Yeah.
And it's just not the case. All right, well, I think we should wrap up our first episode. I want to thank Kevin so much for spending the time. We will be spending a lot more time with him going forward. I'm excited about that. And is there anything you want to say as your final thought?
No, thanks for having me, Tris. Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing this good stuff.
All right, of course, man. Well, everybody take care. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. I would also appreciate a like and a share. And the comment section. Come on, let's stir it up. I'm sure there's some people out there who think that, yeah, maybe we're full of shit and that you do have to buy a bunch of nice stuff or that Squire pickups are horrible. So argue with us down there. I look forward to it. And we'll see you next time with another episode of Conversation with Kev. Take care.